You can always feel that pressure to do more and more and more, but you have to be efficient in how you do things. There has to be a point where you are unwilling to go past. Don't always try to make it work. Sometimes you have to say, this is what I'm willing to do, and you've got to set those boundaries. Otherwise, life will just impose itself on you endlessly.
Welcome to the Marketing Boost Solutions Podcast. Join host Marco Torres, co-founder of MarketingBoost.com, along with expert guests as they deliver incredible, proven solutions to your marketing challenges in each power-packed episode. Captain Marco has guided thousands of entrepreneurs, growing their sales and marketing through the use of value-add incentives. His Facebook groups are home to more than 84,000 entrepreneurs who are raking in sales with his advice. Get ready to be blown away with game-changing lessons for your business.
Welcome to another episode of the Marketing Boost Solutions Podcast. Today, we're interviewing a former Army paratrooper who has served across the globe, including deployments in the Middle East and being mobilized after January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. After beginning his career in intelligence, he attended law school at the University of Virginia and became a JAG officer in the D.C. National Guard. He's the author of How to Deal with Damn Near Anything, the Paratrooper's Guide to Life. John McGlothlin, say hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure to have you on the show, sir. I'm very interested in your story, how you got, what made you go into the military in the first place, and how you became a JAG officer. So why don't you take it back and just bring us up to date on where your background in the military and how you got up and, ended up writing a book as well.
Certainly. So I had not planned to do most of the things I did, whether that was write a book after leaving the military or joining it in the first place. My dad had been in the military before I was born, so I didn't grow up with it. And he was only in for a few years. They were an accomplished few years, but just a little bit of time. So it's not like I grew up with a lot of stories or things hanging on the wall about the military. But when I graduated from, not from high school, but from college, and I was looking at jobs, I was going to be a journalist. And that's something that meant a lot to me. And then 9/11 happened. I thought, world's changed. Maybe I want to be a little more directly involved. So I signed up to learn Arabic and to join the Army and had an amazing time. Now, a lot of people were very worried about me joining the Army. And this loops back to what the book talked about that I wrote after I left, because they did not associate me with the type of person who joined. And by that, I mean that I was very much an individual, a little on the sarcastic side, not necessarily the type of person who seemed like they would thrive in an environment where following orders was how things worked. But I knew I had some gaps to fill in my own development. And I didn't think that there was any better way to do so. Plus, I wanted to serve my country. But I'll be honest, and this is true for a lot of soldiers, it worked for me on a personal level as much as it worked on a patriotic level. So I got the development I was looking for, had a lot of adventures. And then after about 10 years full time, I reached an inflection point where it was like, okay, I've kind of done a lot of what I came to do. Am I going to learn as much over the next 10 if I stayed as I did in the first 10? And the answer was not enough to live in the middle of nowhere. I wanted to, live in a big city. I was like, I wanted to get married at some point. I was like, I'm going to die alone if I stay surrounded by people who either I'm not interested in or aren't interested in me. So I got out and went to law school on the GI Bill. And after a few years of being out, it started to dawn on me, after a period where I was way too judgmental of folks, that I had actually learned a set of lessons and developed a set of traits in the military that even I hadn't appreciated at the time. A lot of these things aren't written down. They're about the environment that's created and the lessons you learn and little steps along the way. And I realized that there is nowhere else that teaches them, or at least that teaches them in the same way or as effectively. So I thought maybe I have something to share. And I looked around at what other veterans were doing, and I have nothing but admiration for the folks that write stories about the intense times that they had, the darkest and deepest stresses and struggles that they face. That is not what I had to bring to the table. I went to Iraq, went to Afghanistan. Those will always be part of my life. But those aren't the experiences I rely on now. In day-to-day, normal life, facing normal people challenges and professional or personal life. It's something different. So I thought there was a gap to fill, and I wrote the book to try to help fill it.
Cool. So you got into, tell me more about what it means to be a JAG officer.
Certainly. So having done the Arabic linguist human intelligence thing, which is what I did first,
And that meant you were on the ground in Afghanistan, or rather, in
Yep,
Iraq, as an
definitely
interpreter
in
or what
Iraq.
have you? Not an interpreter, but a communications expert.
Talk to people, find out what's going on. It's not a lot more complicated than it sounds, frankly. And in Iraq, since it's an Arabic speaking country, it was my job to get out there and to talk to people and to get their thoughts and opinions, but also, if they knew something that might be useful about us finding the people we wanted to find, all the better. And then Afghanistan was my second deployment. So that I was already in more of a training and supervisory position. So I spent about half my time out there training teams, looking over people's shoulders who maybe hadn't done it before, hadn't done it as much, and about half my time at headquarters going over more strategic kind of decisions. Where do we send people? What do we want them to do when they get there? So those are the kind of experiences I had during those stages. And after that, I got out and JAG.
Let me interrupt for a second. Quick question.
Please.
When you were doing that, my brother-in-law was deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan and what have you multiple times. And one of the things he did as well was, they kind of had him incognito, growing out the full beard to be mixed in with the people in Afghanistan. Was that part of your
Yes,
role as well?
I did have a beard in Afghanistan. It's hilarious. The stuff that's kind of meaningless to us. I had a coworker. He was in his mid 40s, and he looked every bit in his mid 40s. Not saying that as an insult. If anything, he looked a little older. They would treat him like a child if he did not have a beard. It was such a symbol of adulthood to the Afghans that even if somebody clearly looked like an adult anyway, it didn't matter. They'd crack jokes, wouldn't take him seriously. He wouldn't treat him like he was in charge. So because originally he wasn't going to get to grow a beard because he was more at headquarters, not necessarily going out a lot. But we needed him to have credibility when he did deal with people. So we had to kind of acknowledge, hey, this is a local custom. So it's beard time. He grew it out. And my beard's okay. Like, it's nothing. Nobody's going to confuse me with like a lumberjack or a Viking. But it's not bad either. This guy's beard was fantastic, just like a grizzly bear. So yeah, once he grew that, all of a sudden he got all the respect that he was due anyway. But you gotta meet people halfway. You can't just pretend that they should think like you think they should. You gotta
fit in at least enough for them to get past your and then open up and start communicating, etc.
Exactly.
And Arabic is one difficult language to learn. I would imagine if you're not using it, you're losing it as well. I remember I've spoke Portuguese for a few years, but since I don't practice it, it's gone. So I interrupted you. You were telling us about being a JAG officer and what that entails today. And I'm really curious about what it entailed for you during January, since you were deployed or asked to participate in the January 6th investigations. Tell us about that and how where were you left off?
Sure. So I should give the mandatory disclaimer, not speaking on behalf of the Army or Department of Defense or the government or anybody but me as an individual. So just putting that out there as is required and as is a good idea anyway. So when January 6th rolled around, I was part-time, National Guard once a month and maybe a couple weeks a year for training. That's the status I was in. And then obviously what happened on January 6th, people trying to overthrow the peaceful transition of government. And as is pretty well known, we were not called as early as we might have been. I was definitely looking at my phone, looking at the TV, looking at the riots, phone. And I'm like, this is why we exist. Like, when is the bat signal going to go up? So by the time we did get there, had two jobs. One is to help everybody else that was coming in get on the same page. Because the last thing you need, everybody luckily wanted to help. So we got National Guard folks coming in from all 54 National Guards, 50 states, DC, and 3 territories, all sending people. So making sure that everybody was doing the right thing. Nobody got a little overexcited. Nobody, sometimes people can get a little bored even when they're doing stuff like that, trying to keep people in check, make sure they knew what the rules were. And then sometimes so that was one piece of it. And the other piece was going over some questions because this was unprecedented. We hadn't necessarily put soldiers in the Capitol before, at least not in centuries. So what does that look like? What are they allowed and not allowed to do? And some of these questions hadn't really been answered before. So it's funny, a lot of people when they become lawyers think they're going to be dealing with these like philosophical questions about the Constitution. And most people don't, including me, don't deal with that most of the time. It's usually a lot more practical. Did this person break this rule or violate this law? This was actually a time where we talked about like deep constitutional questions. And it was all about figuring out how to respond to something that had never happened before and in a way that didn't make it worse.
Is your business on autopilot yet? Do you have automation in place to capture, nurture, and convert prospects into clients via email, SMS, ringless voicemails, appointment setting? Get all the inbound and outbound marketing tools in one place. Go to marketingboostsolutions.com for more on automating your business so you can make money while you sleep.
It was something none of us predicted, none of us prepared for. I actually found out about it first when I was driving back from something. And a buddy of mine called me on the phone. He's like, "Do you see what's happening?" And I assumed it was a couple people throwing some things, standard variety anger. But I had no idea. I got home, turned on the TV, and found out it was a full blown breach of the Capitol. People trying to get into the chamber, and people shouting to hang the vice president. It was something that we'd never seen before. So it was
definitely pretty crazy. Why do you think
shocking.
why do you think the National Guard, again, I know this is an off subject for what we were talking about with
That's
your
fine.
book and on leadership and what we can learn from the military, but what could we have learned? I mean, it just seemed odd to me, so I'd like your opinion. I mean, why was it so many hours before you guys were called in, and why were you guys, do you think, why were you not called in prior to the event to protect, knowing that there was going to be a big huge gathering and everything else, and National Guard was not set up in advance?
Well, let me answer it this way. So a lot of investigations have occurred into what happened and why, and who called who and who didn't. And what it all boils down to is this: the military, we have a job. That job is not to be in charge of everything. And you've seen in other countries where the military looks around and says, this civilian government has no idea what the hell they're doing. Let's take over. And it almost never works. And yeah, maybe the short-term problem is solved, but it creates all these larger problems about who's in command. And when people get a taste of power, they usually don't want to give it up. And that doesn't change just because they have a uniform on. So we have a job. We have a specific job. And that job involves doing things that we are ordered to do when we're ordered to do them. And there may be times where on some minor level, like maybe you're not ordered to save somebody's life, but they're in immediate danger and you can color outside the lines. But by and large, the reason the military is what it is and is respected like it's respected is because we don't go around looking for ways to assert ourselves. So the bottom line was the people who were in charge of DC Guard specifically, which was in DC, so that was who was the nearest people, did not want us there. And I don't need to get into the individuals that didn't make certain decisions, but our civilian chain of command didn't call us. And obviously, it would have been a lot better if there had been enough security, military, civilian, whomever, to stop what happened from happening. There wasn't. So looking forward, we can see why that didn't occur and hopefully ensure that we can stop it from happening again, at least.
Yeah. Well, not to insert my political beliefs here, but it all seemed that almost too much of the fact that you guys weren't called in almost seems like people were hoping this would happen. So it would stain that political party forever. But anyway, off to a different subject. On to, you've learned a lot in the military, a paratrooper, intelligence officer. How did now you've written that book on what you learned from the military, or how to deal with damn near anything. Tell us about that. What does the military teach? How can we learn from the military, whether we're in the military or not, or do we need to be in the military to get some of those lessons you talk about?
No, you don't need to join. And I had a wonderful experience. I'm still in part-time and have a wonderful experience with it, but you do not have to join to learn from us. And here's what I mean by that. Understandably, most of the things that are written or the movies that are made about the military are about combat. And as I said, I went to Iraq and Afghanistan. I get that. I get that firsthand. But that's not going to apply to most people. So we see those stories and they're compelling and they're dramatic and they should be told, but they're not the ones that we can necessarily learn from. And as I mentioned, it's not what I use in day-to-day life. So I looked around and what I saw both in school and in the workplace were a lot of people who were smart. They were good socially. They were good, morally good people, but they were struggling, or at least they weren't getting as far as their other talents show that they should have gone. So I was like, what's the limiting factor here? What's missing? And I realized that there were specific traits, and I picked 5 to go over in the book. And these traits are things that the military develops specifically and uniquely well. but they're things that schools and workplaces usually don't develop. And it's not because schools and workplaces don't care, it's because they're busy with other stuff. For workplaces, you got a job to do, literally. You may or may not have the ability to develop and to invest in developing people on individual levels, especially when they get up and leave tomorrow. And it may or may not be something that you had time to, you don't may not necessarily get the benefit of your investment. So in schools, usually when people get developed, it's almost by circumstance. You meet a lot of people who aren't like you, and hopefully you get some different perspectives. But you don't have to do that. You can go to college, if you go to college, and you can hang out with people who are just like you. There's no guarantee it's going to happen. So the inspiration for it was realizing that these lessons were going unlearned and untaught in other places. And by picking these traits and telling these stories, that I could hopefully help other people develop like the military helped me. And no, you don't have to get up at 3 a.m. You don't have to make your bed every day. You don't have to do 5,000 push-ups. And I get why people advocate that stuff. It worked for them, right? The people telling these stories are telling them because it gave them a successful and a meaningful life. But it's not all about intensity. You do not have to be a steel bar bending, nail chewing son of a you-know-what to be successful and to learn from the military. There's a lot of people in the military who you would not know walking down the street. And these are people who've done badass things, who have, decorated combat records. You would never know. You'd never know. Just some guy walking down the street, you would have no idea. You don't have to be Captain Intensity in order to reflect some of the lessons that the military has to teach.
And so give me some ideas on, what the military can teach when it comes to the discipline for business owners, for entrepreneurs and what have you.
Absolutely. So the one
or
that
being a risk taker or
right.
What, where would you say there's a correlation?
All right. Well, let me give you two, one for entrepreneurs, one for risk takers. So for entrepreneurs, the trait out of the 5 that I think is the best place to start is the first one, self-awareness. It can be difficult when you are either the boss or you're it, to take the time to ensure that you have an accurate view of yourself, because we're all busy. We got 1,000 things going on. It can be difficult to sit down and take that feedback from people. First, it can be hard to get the feedback. People usually don't want to give honest feedback because it can be awkward. You never know how somebody else is going to take it. So you give somebody some honest feedback, they get mad at you, it gets dramatic, and you're like, this would be a lot easier if I just told you, oh, everything went fine, even when it didn't go fine. So it can be hard to get the feedback from other people that you need, especially if you're super busy like an entrepreneur. You're in charge like a lot of entrepreneurs are. So that's where I would recommend starting. And self-awareness is especially developed in the military because we spend a ton of time around each other. And usually that leads to people being less artificial. Whereas if I'm dealing with somebody half hour a day, I got one meeting with my boss every day, every week. I can make sure I am acting a certain way during that meeting. And it makes sense. I want to put my best foot forward. But where people stumble is when they pretend like it's the only foot they have. And it starts to wear on them and it starts to be stressful. And it doesn't actually lead to any kind of underlying, you're not making the product better. You're actually just trying to convince people something instead. So for entrepreneurs, especially when you're busy and you're on your own sometimes, I really advocate finding ways to get honest feedback from people so that you can be more aware of both your strengths and your weaknesses. Let me say that before I finish. A lot of times people think improvement is only about being told you suck at something and trying to not suck at it anymore. But sometimes it's about being aware of your strengths in ways that you don't necessarily realize and where you can build on something you're already good at. Self-awareness is about that too.
Cool. So you've got 5 basic rules in your book, or what would you call those 5 steps?
I call them traits is the word I decided to go with.
And we covered 1 or 2 of them just now. Go ahead and tell us about the other ones and get us fired
Sure,
up
I'll give you the rundown.
Book.
So appreciate it. So self-awareness is the first one because it's kind of like Google Maps. You can put in the directions where you're going. That's great. But if you can't put in where you are, it's going to be hard to get directions that actually get you there. So the next one after that, the second trait is initiative. And that involves, like you said, risk-taking, where it is the idea of embracing an imperfect decision, that there's a point where gathering more information isn't going to help you. And you may not feel like you know enough because it would it would be better to know more before you did something. But is the cost, the time, and the energy of gathering more info not worth it when it would be better to just make a decision, And if it doesn't work out, you can make a new one next time. Then you got to decide based off the decision whether that's right. Some decisions you really, you don't have a kid and then decide a year later that it wasn't maybe the right decision for you. But when it comes to launching a product or a marketing campaign or making a strategic decision that you can change, then maybe it's better to get off your couch, your desk chair, and to go ahead and give it a try. And if it doesn't work, you can learn from that instead of just waiting for the perfect time. So that's the second trait, initiative. Third one, adaptability. It may seem like a fairly common sense thing, but a lot of times people will think the plan is the point instead of whatever the plan was supposed to achieve. It's like when somebody wants to stay in a grocery store checkout line because I've been in the line for a while already. Like you feel invested, but no, the other line just opened. Go ahead and get in the new one, even if it feels a little awkward to move your cart out of the way and go between three other people to get there. We can get a little wedded to the plan too much. So adaptability is about ensuring that you're willing to change, and not just change when something bad is happening, but change proactively. Take an occasional look, not to the point you're nitpicking yourself to death, but take a look at what you could do better. And a quick military example is there used to be this thing in basic training where drill sergeants would show up in big numbers and yell at everyone right at the beginning of basic training. You've probably seen pictures of it, the drill sergeants, they're all up in people's faces, they got the hat on and everything. But they stopped doing that. And they didn't stop because of a scandal or a crisis or a lawsuit or anything. They stopped because they analyzed it and they realized people were quietly leaving the military early on because they thought that's how it was going to be. They didn't realize it's a one-time event. And it's a one-time event that stems from Vietnam when they would send people to the military who were going to go to jail otherwise. And the military people were like, hey, we need to establish control here because some of these people have some sketchy backgrounds. So what the military did was adapted proactively, took a look at this. Hey, there's some quiet hidden harms here. Let's see if we can do it a different way. So that's the third trait, adaptability. The fourth one is efficiency. I think this is important for entrepreneurs as well, because the grind set, the hustle culture, you can always feel that pressure to do more and more and more. But you have to be efficient in how you do things. Trying to be turned up to 10 all the time is like trying to throw a punch as hard as you can instead of learning how to throw a punch correctly. You're just going to miss and fall on your face. You have to understand that sometimes less is more in terms of the amount of effort you put forth. And you want to wait for those correct moments to, maybe you have an important deadline and you can pull some all-nighters then. But that can't be all the time. You're going to burn out. And even if you don't burn out, you're going to start burning out the people around you. You're going to start making subpar decisions. They actually did research for munitions factories in World War II. Because, I mean, talk about a time where nothing's going to be more important than that. And they realized past a certain point of hours worked at these munition factories, so not combat, not life or death like that, people were contributing zero to the amount of munitions. They were so tired, and they were so ineffective that they were contributing literally nothing. So there's a point at which for any given task, and that point will change based off the task, take a break, take a breather, put some time into something else. So that's the next to last one is efficiency. Then the last one, the fifth one, is what I call insistence. And briefly, that is about setting standards and enforcing them, setting boundaries. It is very easy to try to always be adapting to what's happening around you. Sometimes it can feel like that's what makes you a good person or a smart person, is that adaptability. But there has to be a point where you are unwilling to go past. And a lot of times this is hard, especially when it's interpersonal relationships. Maybe easy in a business context to say, hey, $20 apart, that's as far as I'm going. But it can be more difficult in personal relationships to say, hey, I'm not going to help you. I can't help you do this today. I can't give you a ride. I can't help you move. I can't accommodate you. And I advocate in the book, and the military is good about this, find an alternate solution, right? Try to set up some terms that do work for you, but also work for the other person. But don't just go along to get along all the time. Don't always try to make it work. Sometimes you have to say, this is what I'm willing to do. This is the agreed upon, or is now going to be the agreed upon way that we do things. And you've got to set those boundaries. Otherwise, life will just impose itself on you endlessly. So those are the 5.
That makes a lot of sense. And especially like you were describing earlier, when you're in the military, when you're hanging out with your crew and, you know, you're part of that group a lot, there's boundaries that can easily be crossed when people act like, okay, we're friends in the afternoon, you know, but then tomorrow morning I need you on point, and there's no, you know,
Yep.
Here's the rule, here's the boundaries, here's the standards, and so on and so forth. Well, Well, great. Well, hang on just a second. We're going to hear from our sponsor, and we'll be right back.
It's time to wow, surprise, and impress your clients with the most powerful customer draw card available anywhere. The Marketing Boost Solutions Show is brought to you by Marketing Boost, where you can get valuable travel and restaurant incentives to drive your leads from prospects to paying customers. Now you can offer complimentary hotel stays in over 130 destinations worldwide. Go to marketingboostsolutions.com and try it for free right now.
You just heard from our sponsor, Marketing Boost. If you're in business watching this show, you guys got to check out how travel incentives can help grow your business. Our incentives can help you acquire more leads, close more sales, create evangelists for your brand. So you got to go check out marketingboost.com. Go check it out. We're back here with John talking about how the military and studying the military and lessons from the military can help you in business and in life and help you deal with damn near anything, as the title of the book goes. Let me show you what that looks like on Amazon here. Let's see if I can find our page. Oops, wrong spot. How to Deal with Damn Near Anything, the Paratrooper's Guide to Life, available on Amazon. And go ahead, tell us a little bit more about the book, John. Why should we get this book and start reading it?
Well, the worst thing I wanted to do was write a bad book. I'd rather just not write one, or write one that disagreed with research, right? A lot of times, and veterans are bad about this, I am too, is kind of tell some stories. Like, I'm just going to sit here and, run my mouth. And just because something worked for me or for one person doesn't mean it works, period. So people should read the book because it is a mix of stories that are worth telling. But I did a lot of deep dives into the research on these things to make sure that the people who had studied it in a scientific way had come out with results that made sense with what I was saying. So it's a good mix of both interesting stories that hopefully people will find compelling, but also research that gives more scientific detail in terms of either why things are this way or just proving that they actually are that way. So hopefully it's a good mix of both.
Cool. I have to get that and order it myself. Thanks for telling us all about it. One other thing I wanted to go back to a little bit was we were talking about January 6th and your role there. Was that more like developing rules for how to do this going forward? How the National Guard would be involved in the future? Is that what your role was in studying what we do next?
It's a mix. So to link it back to what we just talked about, it was mostly about adaptability. So what's the military doing something like that? There's a lot of rules for good reason about what the military can do in America, right? Because we have police officers, we have other types of, in this case, Park Police is the name of the organization that was in charge of things like the square in front of the White House. Who does that? Somebody's got to be in charge of that, right? If somebody runs in there naked and crazy, like, whose job is it to go tackle them, right? And it's Park Police. The thing about the Park Police is there aren't that many of them because, it's a square. It's not an entire like national park or something. So I say Park Police, I don't mean like national park. I mean like the square in front of the White House. So the military was there, at least in this part of it, to help out. We were the supporting cast to make sure that the Park Police had enough people where if things went sideways, that they could deal with it. Now, things never went sideways for the protests after something like George Floyd was murdered, but you never know, right? And you have to try to be ready beforehand. So we call that civil, I'm trying to remember what we call it, civil disturbance type of work, where people are mad. I'm not saying should or shouldn't be mad, but at the end of the day, people are mad. How can we ensure that they are mad within the Constitution and not, try to take over something bad? So what did we do after January 6th? Our main job was to ensure that nothing like that happened again in the aftermath, because one of the reasons it happened in the first place, there was a lot of talk online from extremist groups saying, we're going to do this. But there's always talk from people online threatening someone or something. So how do you know how seriously to take it? And because it never happened, because nobody ever broke into the Capitol and tried to overthrow democracy before, we didn't expect it to happen. I was shocked when it happened. The problem is that we shouldn't be shocked. It's our job to not be shocked. So we got caught off guard as when I say we, the big umbrella of people who are working to keep things from being overthrown. So Our main job after was to ensure the immediate response was effective and legal, because there are a lot of very specific rules about what the military can and can't do. We are not police officers. They get different training and they have different powers than we do. So job number one, ensure that we colored within the lines. And then there was some of what you mentioned as well, which is, okay, we need to set up some policies and some procedures to try to keep this from happening again. But at the end of the day, it's up to the civilian leadership about when to call us in. And our job is to make sure that when they ring the bell, we're there as quickly and effectively as possible. It's not our job to tell them to ring the bell, to call us up, to encourage us. And it can drive you a little crazy sometimes, but it is extremely important to remember what makes us different from other militaries, and that sometimes there is a short-term price to pay for keeping those boundaries in place, but they're very important and they are worth protecting. So yes,
Now, if I recall, I read and heard it was like, was it 4 or 6 hours before you guys were called into the?
Oh, it was a lot more than that.
Oh my God.
A lot more than that. So, it's,
now you may not be able to comment on this, and I respect if you can't, because there's always potentially retaliation. But anyway,
it's just not professional sometimes. It's not, even if somebody wasn't going to do anything to me if I ran my mouth, it's probably a good idea to.
No question. No question. So that's why I asked this question, and ignore it if you need to. But with the videos that came out after the fact, there's, the controversy, or at least it appears to be, and some sides of the Capitol seem to be police letting people in, escorting people around, versus others that obviously did break down doors and bust windows to get in. Were you privy to any of that, and as to why and how that seemed to be, those two sides of the coin there?
What I can do, no, is the short answer. I was not privy to that, but I can speak from similar other experiences. And every individual interaction is going to be different. So you have to try and trust that every law enforcement officer, police officer, it could be an EMT, anybody responding in emergency. Every situation is going to be a little bit different. You see EMT run up to a car accident, can't treat everybody at once. So there's multiple people. So who gets treated first? So sometimes, having been in the situations like this in the military, not involving January 6th, you got to know when to let people blow off steam. You got to know how to try to redirect their anger in a certain way. Some people want to have a conversation. Some people want to kill you, and you've got to figure out who's who. And if they want to have a conversation, even if it's an angry one, have the conversation. Let them get it out of their system. Talk with them about it, English or Arabic. And because some people just want to be heard. And 99% of people at a regular protest, which January 6th was not, they just want to be heard. So your job is to identify who are the 1 to 5%. Those are just numbers I'm throwing out there that are actually bad apples. How do we make sure they don't raise the temperature for everyone? So when it comes to why some parts of the Capitol things went differently than other parts, those are individual situations. It could be if I'm talking to somebody and they've got bear spray pointed at me, or if they're talking at me and they may have all this crazy shit on, and they may have Auschwitz celebrating shirts, but they're not violent, then maybe I handle that differently. So it's really and not all police officers it was just as much of a shock to them probably as it was to us. So even for the ones that didn't necessarily make the right call, I want to at least initially give them the benefit of the doubt, because it was a crazy day full of crazy people doing things that nobody expected to happen. So they were pretty thin on the ground in terms of numbers, Capitol Police. And a lot of guys there, a lot of guys and gals there did a lot of heroic things. But it's one thing where I can't say they all did the right thing, and they definitely didn't all do the wrong things. You just have to hope that the people who made a decision that looks questionable on video, you have to hope there was a reason before or after the camera started rolling. I have some of those situations, it takes a little more imagination than others to come up with a good reason for what I'm seeing. But exactly. At the end of the day, you have to cross your fingers and think, okay, if you're letting folks in, and honestly, and again, this is me spitballing personally, there's a big difference between letting somebody into some outer hallway where it's like, okay, the building's been breached. How far do you fall back defensively? You fall back to something you think you can defend. Where is that? It could be how the building's laid out. It could be based on how many people are in front of you. Like I said, how armed are they? How angry are they? Like, there's a lot of different, it is a constantly changing Rubik's Cube of decisions for people to make. So the one thing I would caution people against is thinking that there's any kind of behind the scenes plan on either side. Usually the world is chaotic. And I understand when people want to bring in theories or conspiracies or, not to put a name on it, but like sometimes if it looks like a mess, it was a mess. There wasn't necessarily, the Illuminati weren't having a meeting somewhere to like coordinate, like things go out of control. I've seen things go better or worse than planned in the military, where things you thought were going to be dangerous and crazy ended up going fine, and things you thought were going to be ordinary and boring ended up being crazy. So yeah, the difference that you saw between different places could be explained by 100 different things.
Pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And well, John, I don't want to get you to talk too much on that side of the fence, but so it was a pleasure to have you on the show. And folks, go get the book one more time if you'll tell us where they can find the book. And what are you doing? Before, actually, one question I had in mind, I had to ask you, what do you do now outside of the book you wrote? And are you, what keeps you busy?
So it's a split. On the one hand, I am developing the book with the help of an HR consultancy into a training course that businesses can give their employees, either a 1 hour, a morning or 3 hour long, or an all day long flavor. So more to follow on that. I'll reach back out to you when that goes live. I actually just finished a demo for it and things are looking promising so far. And then my actual day job is I'm back on temporary orders with the military doing whistleblower protection. So somebody complains that they were mistreated, or that they were reprised against, as we say, that they were trying to be a whistleblower. We try to make sure that they got a fair shake. So those are the two things keeping me busy right now.
Cool. Well, so you're on that entrepreneur path yourself now. So awesome.
Yeah, I have a lot of sympathy for folks. I joke with my publishers, like I'm an extrovert, but I'm not necessarily a salesman. It's a different skill set. And it's something that I've been working on improving here ever since I wrote the book.
Very good. Is there anywhere else other than Amazon to get a hold of you? Obviously, you're on LinkedIn. Of course, let me show the book one more time here to wrap it up.
Appreciate that.
One more time. How to Deal with Damn Near Anything, the Paratrooper's Guide to Life on Amazon. John, what else did you want to add to that?
That is it. If you want to support your local bookstore, just give them the name and my name, and they should be able to special order it for you as well. It should be available at any bookstore that way if you'd rather go local than go Amazon. I won't judge you one way or the other. And then if you want to link up with me, see what I'm up to, potentially get a look at that training course as it gets developed, LinkedIn is the place to find me.
John E. McGlothlin on LinkedIn. All the links will be below in the show notes. Folks, if you like the content we brought for you today, please do us a huge favor and share this with somebody else. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, hit the subscribe button, and make some comments for us, if you will, as well. Make a comment below in the notes. Rather in the comment section or a review. We'd really greatly appreciate that. If you don't already know, the Marketing Boost Solutions podcast show is now ranked in the top 10% of all podcasts worldwide. So we're on our path to improving. And John, thank you for bringing more powerful content to our show today. Thank you so very much. Thanks for listening to another episode of Marketing Boost Solutions Podcast with your hosts, Captain Marco Torres. Now it's on you. Take the next step now. Go to marketingboostsolutions.com for more on how you can wow, delight, and surprise your clients with the most amazing draw card on the planet. So stay thirsty, my friends. Stay thirsty for knowledge. See you next time.